Hello, everybody, and welcome to our R2v3 implementation and transition assistance webinars sessions. Okay, so the purpose of these is really for us to read the standard, read it along with you, and to discuss the best implementation and transition strategies. If you would like to download the R2v3, please do go on series website, and or you can email us. But I want to note that the version that we're using is the latest draft, because what we're doing is we are trying to get ahead of the release of the standard. And so as soon as the standard comes out, you can then read along the standard with us and see what are the best implementation and transition practices. So with that said, the structure of this is going to be, we're going to have Asal read the standard, and Mike and I will discuss different implementation and transition strategies. If you have any questions after you view these videos, then you can email us directly. And we will be happy to answer any questions that you have. We hope that each session is not going to be longer than 15 minutes, and that way it's going to be easier to digest for everybody. So with that ado, Asal, please do take the mic.
Thank you, Maya. So the R2v3 standard is made up of 10 clauses. We're going to go through all 10 of them one by one. So this section, we're going to focus on Clause 1, Scope. So I'm going to read aloud from it, and then Mike is going to clarify some of the principles. A, an R2 facility shall be audited and R2 certified for all used electronic equipment, components, and materials managed, and all processes and activities undertaken at the facility, as well as any external processes, activities, and locations under the control of the R2 facility and associated with its certification, including all core requirements in this section and R2 process requirements in Section 2 applicable to its scope of operation. B, an R2 facility shall document and have published on the R2 certificate, 1, an accurate statement of the scope of operations covered under the R2 certification, reflective of all processes and activities undertaken for the used electronic equipment, components, and materials managed. 2, all applicable R2 process requirements to which it has been certified. 3, authorized allowances in accordance with the R2 Code of Practices. And 4, all legal names and legal entities associated with the certifiable activities operating at or in conjunction with the R2 facility. C, an R2 facility shall maintain and communicate publicly on an ongoing basis a current listing of all additional locations owned and or operated by the R2 facility that are not R2 certified and are used to manage used or end-of-life electronic equipment, components, or materials. D, an R2 facility shall not have been included by SERI within the previous 24 months of any certification audit in a list of organizations obtained by SERI on its website that have been found to have engaged in deceptive marketing, illegal acts, or other fraudulent activities which could reasonably lead to a false impression that the R2 facility was certified to the R2 standard during that period. So Mike, break this very long section down for us, please.
Okay, well, let's start with A of core requirement number 1. So an R2 facility shall be audited and R2 certified for all used electronic equipment, components, and materials managed, and all processes and activities undertaken at the facility, as well as any external processes, activities, and locations under the control of the R2 facility and associated with its certification, including R2 core requirements in Section 1 and R2 process requirements in Section 2 applicable to the scope of its operations. So there's some key words in Section A about being certified to all equipment, components, and materials, and all processes, activities, and undertaken. And it also adds the additional external processes and activities and locations under the control of the R2 facility and associated with the certification. So the scope has become much more broader than it was under R2 2013. And the scope needs to be better defined. So an example of a scope, what a scope might look like under R2v3 for all used electronic equipment, components, materials, and all processes, activities undertaken, can be kind of ascertained by looking at the general principle there. So for instance, if somebody is a cell phone refurbisher, so they might say like cell phone and cell phone accessories that are collected, refurbished, repaired, resold, and recycled for used electronic end of life. So it's going to be a little bit more specific about the components. A person who is a pure processor might say something like used CRTs, other used electronics that are collected, demanufactured, and recycled using the downstream vendor equipment of material to end of life, specific to what the facility is doing. And if there's any external processes, like facilities that might use another facility to do any type of refurbishing or repair of their facility, and then they bring it back to their facility to sell on their eBay store or Amazon or something like that, will need to also be associated with their R2 certification.
I have a question. The scope mentions that all the locations under the control of the R2 facility are covered under the R2 standard. So what does this mean for our clients who have multiple locations, maybe in different states, and they do send material from one location to the other? Do both facilities need to be R2 certified for that particular?
All R2 not all facilities need to be certified. However, as mentioned in section C of this core requirement 1 here, if they're not certified, they need to be able to communicate publicly on an ongoing basis the facilities that are certified and the facilities that aren't certified. So I think the intent of the standard here is when it says under the control of the R2 facility, it might be collection points that they have that aren't R2 certified because they're just kind of hubs for consolidating material to ship to their main processing facility. So those should also be mentioned maybe on their website to say like, this is only a consolidation point. This is not the processing facility. Only our processing facility in Texas is certified.
Okay, very good. Maya, do you have anything to add or any additional questions with regard to section 1 scope?
No, I just want to reiterate that, well, I want to speak a little bit about the structure of the way that the provisions are laid out. So first we have a general principle that kind of is an introduction to the whole entire section, right? So, and it reads that general principle for 1, which is scope, is to identify and certify all processes, equipment, component, and material streams managed, and activities related to the collection, refurbishing, repair, resale, demanufacturing, asset recovery, brokering, and recycling of used electronic equipment, components, and materials. So, and then later on, like Asal read, they are broken down a little bit more specifics, right? And as Mike mentioned, now R2 is a broader scope, and so now we can actually certify brokering facilities, right? So and the scopes of our clients that were a little bit more general need to be a little bit more specific. So if you're just handling cell phones, then you can say cell phones. If it's mobile devices, it doesn't have to say mobile devices. So instead of before, we would have just said, oh, obsoleted obsolete electronic devices, right? And that was acceptable, but now needs to be a little bit more specific. So.
Okay, thank you. So let's get into subsection B with regards to the scope statement. So Mike, please can you expand on that?
Sure. So subsection B talks about what shall be documented and published on the R2 certificate. So there's 4 portions here. The first portion kind of gives a nod to section A about the accurate statement of the scope of operations, which we just discussed. That's going to be a little bit more thorough than before. So I'm not going to go into that portion again. And then in 2, it talks about the applicable R2 process requirements to which it has been certified. So there are 6 R2 process requirements: downstream recycling chain, data sanitization, test and repair, specialty electronics reuse, materials recovery, and brokering. So that will also be on the statement, on the certificate for each respective facility, to kind of show what kind of process requirements that facility is doing. And every activity that you're doing, you have to have been certified to the process requirements too. So the R2 standard is made up of these 10 core principles in section 1, and then the 6 process requirements in section 2. So all of that portion of the standard is auditable, as well as the R2 equipment categorization, which we'll get into a little bit more in other sections. So it's going to be, besides the certificate is going to have a lot more information and tell you a lot more about the facility now, because it's going to have a very accurate scope statement. It's going to say what process requirements or what that facility does and has been certified to, and any allowances in accordance with the code of practices. So this is kind of like the exemptions, or the non-applicable clauses. A lot of people who are certified to 9001 exclude the 8.3 design and development because they're not doing it. Now, there's not allowances that I've seen in regards to a lot of R2 facilities, but there are some there are allowances under the code of practices. And then subsection 4 here of B says all legal names and legal entities associated with the certifiable activities operating at or in conjunction with the R2 facility. So this could be other DBAs or other legal entities that are used in conjunction with the R2 facility for the used electronic business. So a lot of times people might have online stores that are under a different DBA or something like that. Mm-hmm. So those will all need to be called out on the certificate as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say in conjunction with, so say I do hard drive degaussing on my facility, but I have a third party come to my facility, destroy my hard drives, and leave. Would that be in conjunction with? Or would that be outside the scope?
I think that would be outside the scope, but it might be applicable under the external processes, because mm-hmm. it's something that's done at your facility. Mm-hmm. So it's the way that you're managing data sanitization, is you're having a third party come on site to perform a service, either data wiping, degaussing, or physical destruction. So if it's like a third party coming onto the R2 facility, then it would be included in the scope. But for Section D, I believe that this is talking specifically about the legal names and legal entities belonging to the R2 facilities ownership that are working in conjunction with whatever corporate or not corporate organizational entity.
Okay.
Exactly.
What are some authorized allowances? So what are some of the examples? The first that comes to my mind is brokering. If I'm just brokering, then some of these sections would not apply to me. Is that correct?
That is true. So, and then now we have Appendix F, which talks about brokering too. So the code of practices for R2v3 is going to be different than the code of practices that's in existence now. So I don't know what all of those allowances will be, you know, in terms of what they're planning on doing, since some of that is already in the process requirements. But let me see here. There's only a few allowances, and some of them were rescinded. Like there was the co-location allowance, which that one was rescinded previously. And then there's the campus allowance. And that one is used the most frequently, I would say, because facilities
kind of clustered together in one kind
exactly. And they could actually be like in the same city. They don't have to be like on the same street. You know, so that's the one that I've seen used the most frequently. The broker allowance is going to be under Appendix F now, and then there's the focused materials processor allowance, which I think is rarely used because people just send stuff to the FM processor.
Okay. Maya, anything to add to section B?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the all legal names and legal entities, this is worldwide.
Okay, so if you have facilities in multiple locations across the globe, they would have to be listed here.
Yes, because they are different. There may be different names, but if they're under same management, top management, then yes.
Okay. Thank you, guys. So moving on to section C, please expand on that if it's any different than subsection 4 above.
Okay. So I think that this one, the best way to manage this one is through a website, because it says R2 facility shall maintain and communicate publicly on an ongoing basis a current listing of all additional locations owned and are operated by the R2 facility that are not R2 certified and used to manage end-of-life electronic equipment, components, and materials. So I think, you know, if they have another facility that's new and it hasn't got R2 certified yet, or, you know, they don't intend on getting it R2 certified, they need to specifically state. And I think the best avenue for doing this is through a website to say like Dallas facility certified, Oregon, Portland facility not certified, a Minnesota facility is used for consolidation, but no processing is done there. It is not R2 certified. So this is really a way, and a lot of R2 facilities or organizations have consolidation or collection points where there's no processing done, just, you know, for the sake of logistics and consolidating loads to go to whatever closest processing or facility.
Okay, so a consolidation point or collecting activity would have to be listed here, because it would be an R2 facility that we don't plan on certifying, right?
Correct.
Okay, anything else with regards to subsection C?
Not for me. Maya, do you have anything to add?
No, but this can also be a store location, right? Not just the consolidating facility. So for example, if I am an R2 refurbisher and I refurbish in one facility and I want to get certified at that facility, but I might have a physical store and or warehouse where I am housing already tested, refurbished, ready for resale, ready for reuse equipment, then maybe that facility doesn't make sense for me to, you know, get it certified because the product is already a final product, but I do need to list it here.
Okay. And what about if you're selling online? Like if you're selling refurbished, tested equipment on Amazon?
So I think Mike already addressed that when he was talking about earlier that you have to under 1B4. So B4 states that all legal names and legal entities associated with certifiable activities operating at or in conjunction with the R2 facility. So for example, then your Amazon store, to specifically answer your question, then your Amazon store name has to be listed as a location.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's very helpful because I feel like a lot of clients do have online retail avenues where now, before it would not have to be addressed, but now it would have to be addressed under this standard.
If it's a legal name or a legal entity.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So define that.
So a legal name or a legal entity would be like if it's a registered corporation or LLC or some other form of organization that's registered with the state in which they operate, or some DBA stemming from from the LLC or corporation. So if they have like a separate legal name, like on Amazon, if it's like Resell LLC doing business as electronics for sale,
Mm-hmm.
and then their Amazon store name is electronics for sale, then that would be a legal entity. But if Resell LLC just has a username of Resell 6734 on their eBay store, and it's not a DBA or a LLC or a corporate entity or something other type of business organization registered with the state, then it's not required to be on there. Only legal names and legal entities.
Okay. So it sounds like our clients are, R2 facilities are going to have to really look at all their activities on a case-by-case basis and determine if it falls under this reporting requirement.
Yes.
And Mike, I just want to, talk about a little bit about that, because I think that in the past, right, sometimes if you have an online store, but this is way back, it can fall by the wayside to disclose that and or to for that to be part of the audit, right? So however, now the way that the standard is actually also with version 2013, when we were kind of going towards the last few years, right? We were diving a little bit more into what are the resale avenues. And so all of that information, all of those store names, even whether they are associated with that legal entity specifically, they had to be disclosed, and that had to become part of the audit. So Mike, right? I mean, the store names, even if they are part of that organization X, it does have to be disclosed, listed somewhere.
It does, yes. And that should be in the audit report or, somewhere. It depends on how each registrar reports that or mentions that. But on their licensing agreement with Siri, it just lists all legal entities. It doesn't list like their online stores or anything.
Right. So I think in part of for example, for the implementation or for the transition, we can really take a look at the context of the organization and talk about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And kind of as one of the opportunities and or strengths, this is where the organization can identify all different types of resale streams that they have. So that way, that's already folded in from the beginning within the scope, within the implementation, and that's going to fall under all of the operating controls.
Mm-hmm. And how much do you think this is going to expand our audits? A certification audit or a recertification audit? It doesn't sound like it's going to expand it by much because that was already part of our duties to disclose in the first place.
Right. So I'll take this question, Mike. So this is only going to add on to number of samples that we will look at.
Uh-huh.
So our audit is going to be the same. However, maybe depending on the number of in the number of streams, right? The number of samples we have to look at, it's going to have a direct effect on the amount of time spent in auditing for us as well as for the certification body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. What about subsection D? Do you guys, is there any anything specific you guys want to point out with regards to that?
Well, this one is just a way to kind of penalize the bad actors, right? People who have fraudulently marketed themselves as R2 certified and are not and have gotten caught, have they're barred from being certified for at least 24 months if they've engaged in that type of deceptive or fraudulent activity. So it's a way to kind of punish the bad behavior of people who, that put some teeth into what there was a list of non-R2 certified facilities before on Series website, and that specific list was those who said that they were R2 certified but were not.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of putting more teeth in that. If they want to become R2 certified, then they have to wait at least 24 months from the time that they had been caught engaging in these type of activities.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't not limit it. It doesn't sound like it limits it only to deceptive marketing activities, because it says the companies that have been found to engage in one, deceptive marketing, which you talked about, two, illegal acts, three, or other fraudulent activities. So illegal acts can be that scope is very broad.
Yeah, illegal acts. That is true. Yes, I was only focusing on really the deceptive marketing part. So illegal acts is a little bit more extensive. That could be like abandoning a facility with CRTs in it, right? Or sending a illegal shipment and being caught because there were trackers in it. You're sending used electronics to a country that doesn't accept used electronics. They only accept, or they have no consenting authority to show that was a legal shipment.
Mm-hmm.
Then if they're caught doing these type of activities, as well as any other like fraudulent activities, maybe marketing stuff as like reusable and it's broken or not repairable, and then not offering any type of returns. So yes, it was much more broad than I had initially mentioned. There's a lot of activities, I suppose, that could bar somebody from being able to pursue their R2 certification if they've engaged in those type of activities. And I think there's probably several more examples. I'm just trying to hit on some of the ones that come to mind right now.
So what does this mean for my legal and compliance legal and compliance audit? So now do we have to add in criminal activity, because before we were just focusing on regulatory statutes?
Well, I think it's criminal activity in regards to a lot of regulatory statutes, like illegal dumping of material. So like the regulations state that the material should be managed a certain way. If you don't manage it a certain way, then it could be like a criminal, activity under the health and safety code of that state or something like that. So I think it probably is illegal acts in regards to regulatory activity for the most part, but it could also be other types of things. It could be like financial or some other stuff like that. So I don't know that it's necessarily going to expand our compliance audit portion. It possibly could, because this is assuming that these facilities are not the R2 certified facilities, but these are like the bad actors who are wanting to become R2 certified because they need that certificate to get their business, and they've been found doing some type of bad act, whatever that may be.
Okay.
So we hope that those R2 certified facilities, with their regulatory list and their other requirements list, are complying and conforming to the requirements that are both their legal regulatory requirements as well as the ones that they subscribe to, and are not doing any of these activities here.
Okay. Thank you. Final thoughts?
Yes, actually, I would like to add something to this.
Mhm.
And Asal, you actually had a good question, which is kind of bringing me up to, my consultant hat and auditor hat. So this is something, this section, 1D, is something that, for example, compliance officers, as well as consultants, as well as auditors need to take a look at every time you take a look at somebody's downstream vendor flowchart or downstream vendors that they're using, right? Because at the end of the day, when you're first starting to approve that new potential vendor, you do want to go to this list to make sure that they're not listed there, right? So that's the first step to kind of see, like, oh, are they designated as a bad actor, so I need to steer away. So I think that this section or this list is a good starting point for something else that we're going to talk about later in our series, which is downstream vendor due diligence and downstream vendor audits. So yeah.
Awesome. That's very good advice for any facility who is looking at downstream vendors. Any final thoughts with regards to section 1 scope? I think we dug in pretty deep.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think we dug in really deep in section 1, and we're excited to continue this with all the other sections. And as we said, we're going to try to keep them short, but we do want to do a deep dive with all of you. So with that said, we will end this section and see you soon for section 2. Thanks.